Good morning, everybody. You hear me? Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to our participants. I wrote this last week, and I had a stupid joke about thanking our participants for being here a week before Pesach and you, but with what happened in Israel yesterday, I think it deserves more attention to our presence here, to either an unwanted or a wanted distraction, but all three of you have family in Israel, and many of you have family and friends in Israel, so our thoughts and our hearts are there, but I hope our conversation can ground us in the moment, at least in this moment. So I want to thank you also for being here, given that the circumstances changed from when I first reached out to you to when we planned this and to right now. So thank you, and Pesach is in 8 days. One thing I also want to say before we begin is how lucky I am, how lucky we are to have this luxury of riches in our community. This is our second Mercaz event, and I have not yet gone outside of my personal Rolodex to fill these seats. And it just goes to show how lucky we are to be in Chicago, to be in the community that we are, to get to have these voices in our community or adjacent to our community. And it allows us to demonstrate that what we're doing here is not a debate, that you don't come to cheer on the person who represents your community or your ideology or the person who is in your corner of the Jewish world, but to be exposed to people who you might have thought are not in your corner or might be in some far-flung corner of the Jewish world, but you realized in being challenged by their thoughts and embraced that they might be rather close to you, and that the distance between us, between our institutions, between what motivates us to join a particular institution is much smaller. And in that, we recognize the depth of community and how much we're enriched by the communities that occupy the Jewish world. Last time, I said at the beginning, and I'll say it again now, Dan, Judy, and Josh are not panelists, but participants in a discussion. And while I sent you the questions ahead of time, I hope you won't be shy in redirecting the conversation to where it has already been going on for about the last half hour or so. And if I ask a dumb question, reframe it or just recenter the conversation to what is of interest to you, because that's what's going to be the most compelling and make this conversation not just exist in this hour or so, but that it will be something that is ongoing and is really not just one that's up here, but occupies the entire space of our community. The other thing I said last time, and if you weren't here, one of the privileges of starting your own thing is you get to decide how it goes. I'm not a big fan of long biographies. Again, incredibly stellar group of people here. If you want to see much of their background, go to our website. But I want to introduce Dan Libenson is the founder and host of Judaism Unbound podcast and the president of the Lippman Kanfer Foundation for Living Torah. Judy Finkelstein-Taff is the head of school at Chicago Jewish Day School, and Rabbi Josh Feigelson is the president and CEO for the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. So again, thank you very much for being here. You can welcome them. So I want to begin by anchoring our discussion at the beginning with an awareness of who you are and how you got to be the person you are and how you got to be sitting up here, and specifically what inspired your career path, your choice to be a Jewish leader. So Dan, I'll start with you. What need was not being met in the Jewish world that compelled you to start Judaism Unbound? And how has that helped inform your choice to also work for the Lippman Kanfer Foundation?
Well, first of all, I just want to say how grateful I am to be sitting on the bima at Rodfei Zedek. I mean, I don't think I've ever done that before. I'm rarely in this room and certainly not on the bima. But I appreciate that you tolerate me anyway. So it's funny because I feel like, to some extent, my story of Jewish leadership is like Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 3, where he says, whenever I try to get out, they pull me back in. It's not what I wanted to do. So it really is about a sort of an unmet need. I think sort of at different parts of my life, it's been about the unmet need that I've had about. The way I think about it is that I am a sort of disaffected optimist, meaning like I never much like things, but I always think they can get better. For me, for a variety of reasons, because of my own upbringing, I mean, I grew up, I was the son of a rabbi. We made Aliyah when I was 14. I did not want to do that. And I went to an Orthodox high school, which I didn't understand and didn't really like. And I feel like I absorbed a lot of information about Judaism, but I didn't resonate with a lot of the practice of Judaism as I had experienced it. And so I was disaffected by it, but I knew enough to know that there could be something else. And I think that that's been the common theme in my life. And I think that in terms of why we started Judaism Unbound, when I was here at the University of Chicago Hillel, I remember one time talking with a board member and talking about what we were doing on campus with students, and this board member said, "Oh, I wish I had that." And I said, "Yeah, well, it wasn't really like that in the 70s or whenever you went to college, and that's kind of a bummer, but it is what it is, and now it's better." And she said, "No, it's not that I wish I had that when I was in college." She said, "I wish I had that now. Because I feel like when my kids went off to college, I realized that I wasn't really getting that much out of Judaism, and I was doing it for them. And now that they're out of the house, I realized like I don't know what it means to me, and I wish I had a program that would kind of help me discover that." And that was when I kind of realized that what we were doing for college students was actually needed for everybody. And we had no money, so we said, let's do it as a podcast. But the goal is to do it in bigger ways. And so the answer basically to why I'm at Lippman Kanfer Foundation for Living Torah now is because we have more money. And it's a way of trying to continue to do this with resources. I wasn't that great at raising money, so now I have the money, and now we can do other things with it. So it's exciting to be able to think about I know one of your later questions is like, what if we had more money, what we do? So now I get to think about that question, so it's exciting.
Judy, what learning experiences did you have, formal or informal, that led you to want to be a teacher and go in a career in education, and what kind of motivated you to want to lead a multi-denominational school, something that's a bit outside of the norm?
That part was a little crazy, but we'll get to that. Whoops. But thank you. But first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting us also, and thank you to Rabbi Minkus for putting this together. And when he was talking about sort of the riches of the community, I thought to myself that that really connects with me in the sense that I grew up in what was then called an outlying Jewish community. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and my parents actually helped to found the very first Jewish day school in Phoenix. At the time, the only major organization that would send any teachers or a principal or anybody to be candidates to staff that day school was the Orthodox community. So that we didn't have the luxury of a multi-denominational situation. But my parents started that day school, and luckily I didn't get to go to it because I was too old. My sister went. But I did go to Camp Ramah, and that single experience really affected the rest of my life. And when I got a little bit older, I also went on a mission to the Soviet Union and met a lot of Soviet Jews, particularly Vladimir Slepak, Ida Nudel, and Anatoly Sharansky. And those three individuals ended up becoming part of my life in a way that I never would have imagined. And so in those days, I thought it only makes sense for me to try to bring what the experience I had at Camp Ramah, to bring it to the day schools, to bring it to the Jewish community, to bring it to afternoon religious school, to junior congregation. Wherever I could bring it, I wanted to bring it. And so when coming to Chicago Jewish Day School is kind of a funny story, because I feel like I'm an accidental tourist, that I was studying in Israel on a fellowship and came back to the United States to visit some friends. The friend had a friend that was starting Chicago Jewish Day School. So on my way back to Israel, they asked, could you just stop and give this group of lay people some advice, because you've been in Jewish education for so long? And I thought, okay, I can stop in Chicago. At that time, there was a direct flight back to Israel. I stopped in Chicago, and that group of people that I met with were so inspiring, is the only word I can say. They were the most inspiring group of Jewish young parent, they weren't all young, but they were the most inspiring group of people that I had ever encountered in one place. And when I left that conversation, they called me and said, can't you just come and be our head of school? And I'm like, you only have 5 kids. Like, no, I don't think I can do that. And as it turned out, they had 7 kids. And as it turned out, you only have to know that when I called my sister and brother-in-law to tell them that I was leaving my position at Heschel Day School, where there were 550 kids on one campus and 350 on the other campus, and I said, I'm going to go to Chicago for a couple of years and start this school. My brother-in-law said, so how many kids are in the school? And I said, 7. And he said, you're going to a school with 70 kids? How can you go to such a small school? And I said, I didn't say 70, I said 7. So at any rate, somehow I'm here. I'm celebrating my 20th year at Chicago Jewish Day School, so I don't exactly.
How many kids are there now?
Oh, now we have 200 and almost 250, almost. So yeah.
Thanks. I was going to ask that.
We're both parents.
They're parents.
So Josh, what led you to the rabbinate, and how have these stops along the way kind of paved your path towards where you are now?
So when I went to college, I majored in music, and I was an orchestra conductor in college, and did other things. I was involved in a lot of other leadership things, and et cetera. But I'd gone to public school. I'd grown up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And when I went to Yale, and when I got to school and I met these kids who had gone to Jewish day schools, who could walk into a Beit Midrash and knew what all these books were, all these Sfarim were in Hebrew and Aramaic, and they could pull them off the shelf and they could open them and study them. And I was like, that's really cool. I want to be able to do that. And so I got my Hebrew into shape, and I spent the year after college in studying in yeshiva in Israel, and I fell in love with Talmud study, and I found that I was good at it, and I was actually like basically as good as my friends who had spent 12 years in Jewish day school, which is, that's a whole other story. That's not about me. That was about and I will say I will never have the breadth of knowledge that they had, right? The bekiyut, like just, and I see that in my own children also, that just, things that, all the little things that you pick up along the way. But I found that I was really, I loved it, and I came back to the U.S. and I realized I didn't want to go, like orchestra conducting was not where like my heart was. That was, I was looking at years and years of working in, small towns in Europe and learning lots of languages to be able to be competitive, to be, audition for the conductor of the Fargo, North Dakota, civic orchestra or something. And so that was not the lifestyle I wanted. Of course, evidently, if I had just hung around long enough, I could have been the music director of the Chicago Symphony, but okay, because all you need was to be 28 years old. But anyhow, so I thought I was going to go into like cultural policy. I was really interested in that and like the place of the arts in civic life. I took a job working for an arts management consulting firm where we helped with performing arts centers and theaters and orchestras. And it was my first job, and I realized about 6 weeks in, I was like, this is not right. Like, this is not where I want it. Like, what's missing here? And as I sort of thought about it more and more, and I started like making a list of like, what are the things that I want to be able to describe about the kind of work that I do? Like, what are the adjectives I want to use and the descriptors? And I was like, well, I wanted to have something that is meaningful, that's helping to bring meaning to people's lives. I want to be able to be late to work if davening that morning, was later because it's Rosh Chodesh or something. And, I wanted no 2 days should look the same. I wanted my Jewish life to really be at the center of it. I was like, what could possibly do that? I don't know. And then, at a certain point, it's like, oh, you're talking about being a rabbi. And I was looking for where I would go. I wound up, there was a new rabbinic school that was just opening. This was 24 years ago. Yeshivat Chovevei Torah that Rabbi Avi Weiss was founding. And I got on the phone with Avi Weiss one day. And he said, if you've ever heard him talk, I'm doing my Avi Weiss impression. He says, literally the first words out of his mouth, he says, Josh, tell me about your dreams. And I was like, you had me at hello. And so I don't remember the rest of that conversation, but I wound up at Chovevei. I was in the second graduating class there. And for about 5 minutes thought that I might want to be a pulpit rabbi and got disabused of that notion quickly. So I admire you. But decided really my heart was in Hillel work. I came in 2005 to be the Hillel rabbi at Northwestern. Dan, you came like a year or two later. And so we worked together, and that's where we first got to know each other. I got to know Rachel. And I found that basically throughout my career now, for the last, whatever it is, 19 years, wow, is that the through line for me has always been about what motivates me most is, I really love Torah, and I love teaching Torah. And I love what Torah can do in the lives of people. And I will say one of the most important teachings that Avi Weiss gave me was, in order to be a rabbi, he said, you have to really love two things. You really have to love Torah, and you really have to love Jews. And he said the secret is you have to love Jews just a little bit more than you love Torah. I might also add to that now, I think he probably meant this, he just didn't say, I think you also have to love some concept of God and divinity, but that just might be within Jews and people. Anyhow, that led to ultimately founding a social startup inside of Hillel called Ask Big Questions, and I did that for about 6 years, and then I came down here to Hyde Park for a couple of years to be the dean of students at the Div School. And after a couple of years of the long commute from Skokie to Hyde Park, and realizing that was not, that was not the life I wanted to be leading either. I ultimately found my way to my current job, which I never would have expected if you had asked me, but has turned out to be an amazing fulfillment of the kind of Torah that I want to teach, which is at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, where it really is about how Torah and Torah not only as ideas, but Torah as practice can help us be better human beings. How does it contribute to our flourishing as human beings? And so that's been, an amazing last 4+ years. That's just been a real blessing.
Thank you. Shift over to the actual money. Judy, I'll start with you. Having spent time in both legacy institutions and in startups, being the head of school at Chicago Jewish Day School, from nearly its beginning, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges facing Jewish institutions when it comes to funding?
So it's funny, he did give us these questions beforehand, and I really was thinking about it a lot. And I think this is what I wanted to share with you, is that, first of all, in a community like Chicago, we are so very lucky to have families and foundations like the Crown Foundation, like JUF, like Circle of Service, that really are pillars in this area to the Jewish organizations, especially like ours. That being said, I would love to see a national effort to fund Jewish organizations, as particularly Jewish day schools, but synagogues, all of the other organizations. And what I would love to see is something that would fund startups that, like what we were when we started, like those first 5 years of Chicago Jewish Day School were incredibly hard to try, because the niche is so small of who would want to be interested in contributing to a Jewish day school, and even harder because it was multi-denominational, so we didn't have the backing of one of the denominations or the other, and the concept was new to everyone. And then after the 5 years, like after you sort of prove that you're on the right track, that then it turns into some type of endowment. Because unless we endow our Jewish institutions, they won't be, I don't think they can be around forever. And so I think that's really, if I had my druthers, that's what I would say.
Josh, I'm really interested from your perspective as someone who is not working at a Hillel or school or a synagogue. Typically, what we think of as the first stop in our Jewish lives, or carrying through the life cycle. So how do you see the funding as you experience it now, but also how you have experienced it when you worked at a more of a primary, rung on the Jewish ladder?
I just want to acknowledge that Dan and the Lippman Kanfer Foundation for Living Torah have been funders of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. So
watch what you say.
What?
So watch what you say.
Yes, exactly. So we're grateful for your support. I think that, so in my current position, what's really fascinating is that we have been able to develop multiple revenue streams, right? So there's, yes, we have about 35% of our revenue is coming from foundations, about 40% comes from individuals, but about 25% is coming from fee for service, basically people paying for courses, that they take with us, or tuition that they might pay for a cohort program that they're in. And so it's been really, I think not a lot. I'm not used to that. I mean, a lot of us aren't used to that model. It's more akin to something like maybe a museum or an orchestra. Like I look at my CSO subscription and like the various communications I get from the CSO. I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of like, because they want me to be a donor and a subscriber. Oh, okay, right. Or actually a subscriber and a donor. That's probably the better way to put it. And I think that there's something really healthy about that, in that it forces us constantly to be thinking in kind of, to be crass, market terminology, like what value are we providing? And is our Judaism providing something valuable? And are people, if they're contributing, what's the motivation for that? Like, I don't want anybody contributing out of guilt, right? Like that's not, I want, and nobody wants to, or at least I shouldn't say nobody. I think plenty of people fundraise this way. I don't want to fundraise this way of like fundraising on guilt. I want to fundraise on, I have a wonderful thing for you to contribute to because I believe in it so much, and go to jewishspirituality.org/donate. But but I do think, to Judy's point, I had a piece just on Friday in E-Jewish Philanthropy, an opinion piece about. I think there is a lot of philanthropic investment in the Jewish innovation space. Lippman Kanfer is a wonderful investor in that. And at the same time, I see where supporting clergy, supporting day school educators, right? Supporting a lot of the basic infrastructure that we rely so heavily on has become really, really hard. And I was in a, you can read the op-ed, it's about funding enrichment, rabbinic enrichment, and clergy enrichment programs for first responders like your rabbi here, who have been the last 10 years or more have just been an extraordinary time to try to be a community leader. And so, and we're facing a burnout crisis and a pipeline crisis. And so, the kind of programs that we run for rabbis and that others do are just, I think, extremely vital and are underfunded. But I would also say, I was at the Jewish Funders Network conference last year. I don't know if you were in the room for this, Dan. It was in Phoenix, actually. There was a conversation about new programs in various cities, in Atlanta, in Seattle, now in Chicago as well, where foundations and federations have come together to help support Jewish communal professionals sending their children to Jewish day schools. Right, so now in the city, in Chicago, this doesn't really help us anymore because our kids have aged out. But the maximum amount that you would be expected to pay in tuition for all of your children that might be in Jewish day schools is 14% of your adjusted gross income, which is would have been great if a few years ago when I still had 3 kids in Jewish day school. I now only have 1, or will soon only have 1, But I heard, I heard that, and doing the math, I'm it's it's whatever it was, and I got up and I said, and this was with people from Crown and Circle of Service and other people who I know well in the room. I said, I really want to say, this is so great. It's so great what you're doing, and my wife and I are both senior Jewish nonprofit professionals. We make more than $300,000 a year between the two of us, and we have exhausted our savings sending our children to Jewish day schools for 12 years. So whatever you're doing, it's not enough. And so I think there's a fundamental challenge there. And the last thing I'll say, and I want to hear what Dan has to say, is I think also we have to remember there's a fundamental market size problem that we have in the Jewish community that our aspirations are to offer things on the level of quality that competes with everybody, right? Judy's school, the school that my kids go to, needs to be as good as any other school that's out there, right? And the population that we can draw from is a tiny fraction of the total population that Latin can draw from or whoever else. And so we have a real there's a market size fundamental economics problem there. And so it just requires, I would hope more philanthropic investment.
Can I add something? I just want to add that what Josh is saying is so on point, because in my school, we are not a private school. We are an independent school, but we are a Jewish day school. That makes everything about us different. But yet we do have to compete with Lab School, Latin School, Parker, all of those independent schools. And yet our students, we have 63% of our students are on financial assistance because it's just too much for most parents to bear that cost, especially when they have 2, 3, 4 kids. And so, as Josh is saying, that there are foundations that are stepping forward and they're trying to help us. The Crown Foundation just created something called the TAP program. If you haven't heard about it, you can go online and read about it. And we have our own tuition assistance. But at the end of the day, we also have to pay our teachers, and we have a dual curriculum, meaning Hebrew Jewish studies and general studies. And in order to deliver all of that, along with specialists and everything else, it's expensive and it's hard to figure out.
By the way, I don't know exactly what your question is going to be. I mean, you told me, but I don't remember. But I think this is going to be the part of the conversation where I start to become less popular on the stage, because I have a different take. But
Jump in.
well, I just think that Judaism is too expensive, and I think that it doesn't have to be. I think that there's a sort of a one-way ratchet where it's getting more and more expensive, and most people opt out because that's too expensive, even with the subsidy. And so we're having a diminishing population that requires higher and higher and more expensive things, whether that's synagogue life or day school. I mean, I don't think people have to, I mean, no offense, like, I mean, I don't think people have to, I don't think we need day schools. I don't think that, I think we need day schools now, but I can imagine a world where we didn't need day schools. And I don't think we're allowing ourselves to imagine that world because we're taking the set of institutions that we have already and just kind of like thinking about how do we deal with their economic problems. But if it turns out that maybe the solution is and we have, I think, a great example here in this community of an after-school program that in my mind, and my children have gone to both day schools and the Jewish Enrichment Center, that in my mind, the Jewish Enrichment Center has provided my children a better Jewish education than day schools, and certainly one that's more resonant with the kind of Judaism that our family practices, and that I think the vast majority of you all practice, and that of people in the world practice, that like, my feeling is that that's a cheaper model, and it would actually reach more people, and they're limited resources. And one thing that I say, we're a relatively small foundation, so I got a lot of money compared to what I had before to play with, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to most Jewish foundations and certainly other big foundations that we think of in the world. So, everybody, it's like often when you might get a new job and it pays better than your old job and everybody thinks you're rich, but you're not rich, you're just a little richer than you were, when we're talking about the really rich, what could they do? I mean, I think that, one possibility is that they could sort of subsidize Jewish institutions, day schools, synagogues, JCCs, et cetera, so that the cost of participation in them could be brought down as far as it can get, and it's still super expensive, so it still costs, and it always will, because there's not enough money out there in philanthropy, that it's going to bring down the price enough to make it truly accessible to the vast majority of Jews. So what we're looking at is one possibility where the price gets brought down enough so that Jewish professionals, other people that really want to send their kids to day school find it, borderline affordable. If that's the vision, like that's the best we can do. It feels to me like that's not going to solve the bigger problems, which is that the vast majority of Jews, don't find any meaning in being Jewish. So I forget. So I don't know what your question is, but I mean, I just kind of feel like we can take some of these things as a, unchallenged. That of course we need day schools. Of course we need all the synagogues that we have today. Of course we need to sort of sustain all these institutions. But I would challenge that. I would want us to sort of have on the table what would it look like if we started from scratch? And of course, we're not going to start from scratch. But I think the thought experiment that says what would be the set of institutions that we would need if we started from scratch, and then we look at the situation that we have today, and then we say, well, okay, now what do we do? But I don't think we tend to do that thought experiment.
Well, continue that out.
What would it look like?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, for example, and I know this is part of what we wanted to talk about, there's this talk lately about the rabbinic pipeline crisis.
I know you were chomping at the bit to talk about this last time, so
Yeah.
you can start us off there.
Well, so for folks who don't know, what the rabbinic pipeline crisis is, and by the way, part of it is just that somebody all of a sudden a year ago thought of calling it the rabbinic pipeline crisis, so now all of a sudden it's a crisis. It's been going on for decades, but it's that going to rabbinical school is less of a draw than it used to be. And actually, I think that would be an interesting conversation for us to talk about, because I think part of that is and Josh, you talked about it, the role of the congregational rabbi is very difficult and very unpleasant in a lot of ways. Not in all ways, but it's...
Not here. It's only great here.
But it's too much. It's too much, and nobody can do all the things. And so naturally, when a kid looks at that and sort of says, hey, it attracts me to be a rabbi, and then comes talks to the rabbi and says, here's what all the things the rabbi has to do, they're like, well, I don't want to do all that. And they don't go to rabbinical school. And so what's happening is that fewer people are going to rabbinical school. A lot of rabbis are retiring. I think COVID caused a lot of more rabbis to retire. it turns out that, like, Josh was attracted to go to Hillel. There are other rabbinic roles that are attractive. So fewer of the smaller number of graduates of smaller number of people are already going to rabbinical school, and a lot of those are wanting to go to non-congregational positions. So all in all, as a result, there are fewer congregational rabbis coming out of school than are retiring, and there's a sense that synagogues can't find rabbis. So the universal solution that's talked about in the Jewish community is, can we make the price of rabbinical school lower? Maybe we'll attract people through a lower price. Could we somehow recruit people better? I don't know how, but we'll somehow do that. And somehow more and more people will go to rabbinical school, and then the crisis will be over. Another possibility is maybe there are just too many synagogues. Like maybe, and not that we shouldn't have synagogues, but maybe it would be better to have larger synagogues that sort of consolidated than to have a whole bunch of small ones, which, by the way, didn't happen because somebody had an idea 50, 70 years ago. Wouldn't it be great if we had so many synagogues? It was because demographically we were in a different place. Jews were moving out to the suburbs. Jews had a lot of money. They were more interested in synagogue life. And so they built a synagogue in every corner. But that wasn't a plan. So there's nothing sacrosanct about the number of synagogues that we have now. Maybe it would be better to have fewer, bigger ones, and then we would have enough rabbis. That's one option. Or another possibility is to say, let's train a new layer of leaders, of sort of lay leaders, or perhaps paraprofessionals. Like, think about doulas or yoga instructors in the world of health, right? Not everybody's a doctor. And we say that's a better way to have healthy people. So maybe we could say, let's have a new system where we could have fewer rabbis actually reaching more Jews, because instead of the rabbis working directly with the Jews, the rabbis would be sort of would be trainers of other leaders who work directly. And by the way, this to me comes out of the Jethro story in the book of Exodus, right, where Moses is exhausted having to deal with all the people, and his father-in-law comes and he says, not, hey, let's train another Moses. Like, we need 4 more Moseses. Where can we find them? That's not what he says. He says, we're going to only have one Moses, but now you're going to train these other layers that are going to work under you, and that way you won't have to be exhausted, and the people will get what they need. And by the way, that non-exhausted Moses is now an attractive job, right? So in other words, if we could have a job for rabbis where they didn't have to do everything and they weren't exhausted, all of a sudden rabbinical school would be attractive again, I think, to more people. So we would also have more rabbis. So, but we're not thinking that way. We tend to just be saying, how can we get more money into the system as it is? And I think that's not a helpful way for us to think.
I'd give a Rashi on that. I don't think it's only about reinventing. I think the role is getting reinvented. And I think of its own accord, like we right now have a program that's training 55 people to be Jewish meditation sit leaders. We should talk about funding that. But most of whom are not rabbis, right? And who are leading sits in their communities. We have 30 people in a Jewish spiritual director training program, most of whom are not rabbis or cantors.
We should talk about that.
We should talk about that. All right, okay, coffee. See, this is how we do it. And so I think that in a lot of, Dave's got staff, right? Like you got other people. Like there are ways that there are ways that I think folks find to manage that. I think you can't escape the economics. Like I just need to be like be a Marxist for a minute. But like there's a fundamental economic piece of it that I think is driven in large part by two basic realities of most of Jewish life. Number one is that the zip codes that most Jews live in are expensive zip codes to live in. We want to live in urban and suburban areas with good public schools and high property values in most places. And so the amounts that we pay and the amounts that we need to live in those places are higher in places like Chicago, in places like New York, in places like Los Angeles, et cetera. Cost of living is just, we're not living in rural parts of the country. So that's one. And two is totally related to that, is that for most American Jews, college education is a baked-in assumption that we're going to send our kids to universities, and that is an enormous source of financial stress. And so so there's an upward spiral, upward pressure that comes from both of those things, which then means that the amount.
Those are choices that people are making and then paying for them.
Sure, but I'm just saying that there's a question of having your cake and eating it too. Either so then maybe we need to incentivize people or encourage, or people just need to figure out great, a group of us is going to move out to Ames, Iowa, and found a new day school, and we'll get the next Judy, right, to come out, and cost of living is way cheaper, and we can do it. But what do we want that to look like? I mean, I know you're asking a more fundamental thing about what does Judaism look like, but part of it is where does it take place, and what are the other sort of economic assumptions that are built in?
But I think I'm trying to ask also a deeper question, which is whose responsibility is it when Jews make those choices? Whose responsibility is it to sort of pay for the Judaism, right? I feel like the way that you're setting it up is assuming that because Jews want to send their kids to expensive colleges and want to live in high quality neighborhoods and whatnot, that now transfers the responsibility of paying for the Judaism to philanthropy, to rich people, as opposed to saying, when we go to the Whole Foods, or we see that the prices are high, we don't imagine that somebody's going to come in and subsidize the food. We say, if we want that food, then we have to pay for that too. Why in Judaism is there a notion that, you say 25% of your thing is earned revenue? I think that's great. I think your aspiration should be to get it to be 80%. And all of our aspirations should be to get it to be 80%. It means synagogues, I don't know exactly what the model is, but synagogues basically are like that, right? That most of the revenue is from dues that, or dues equivalents that people, because people say, if I want this, then I'm going to have to pay for it. There is no, funders, federation, or foundations tend not to fund synagogues for whatever reasons. But the result is that synagogues have to make it on their own. And I guess my question is, why shouldn't that be true of Jewish life in general, for the most part? And then, in my view, by the way, I say this as a philanthropy, I think that our job, I think in the ideal world, our job should be like the government's job in society, which is to make the roads, right? To make the parks. In other words, that we. So what that means to me is that.
Or the schools.
The schools, but there's a tax base. But but the idea is that and maybe the schools, but again, public schools aren't funded that great. That's not a virtue. But my point is that that there's a cost. We have to look at both sides, I guess. What I'm saying there's the affordability question, but there's also maybe our product is too expensive. But putting that aside, I just want to say, I think that there are certain things that I can imagine philanthropy. What philanthropy needs to do is what people cannot and will not pay for on their own, which are, in economics we talk about that as, market failure, right? Where there might be major resources, like Sefaria, for example, which is an online website that has done an amazing job of getting all Jewish texts online. That to me is an example of an enormous resource that's available to the whole world, but that you wouldn't be able to build that in the early years without philanthropy. That feels to me like those are the roads that are being built, and then it's the job of in America, it's the job of business, and in Judaism, I think it's the job of nonprofits to come along and try to build those businesses on those roads.
Okay, so there's so much to unpack here. I don't even know where to start. But I want to start with the fact that when the fellow panelist says that they don't need the institution that you're running, that creates a little tension. But the truth is that I'm used to it because I run a multi-denominational Jewish day school with Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and other as part of my school. And so if there weren't tension, there's something would be wrong. So, and two Jews, three opinions. So I think that, it's obviously very healthy to have this kind of conversation. What I want to say as a person who served as the rabbi's wife for 34 years, and I have a son who's a conservative rabbi, and his father is a conservative rabbi, I want to say that conservative synagogues don't exist on their membership dues only, that they also exist from contributions and support from the community. And I think that all nonprofits, whether it's a hospital whether it's a food bank or whether it's a Jewish day school or a synagogue, you cannot run them on only the membership dues itself or the day school tuition itself. And in terms of pipeline, I just want to say that everything in education, it's not like a can on a shelf where you can put it there and say, this is where it is, and I know what's going to happen with it. I want to say that when you're dealing with people, thank God, they have their own. They make their own destiny, as we know from the Torah too. And so you can only provide the experiences, the education, the literacy in whatever organization you are, the stream you're in. But I just want to say that the students of Chicago Jewish Day School, I know what kind of values, I know what they're learning, I know what their general education is, their Jewish education, the integration. I know that they're using a Chavruta style learning where you use a partner learning and where the third teacher is the text. And that's in general studies as well as in Jewish studies. And I want to say that I think that our students are being inspired. And I can tell from our alumni that we're making a difference. And I can tell from our alumni that they are going to be active in the Jewish community, but each in their own way. And I don't know how much or how or what, but I can see their involvement. And I see their involvement in leadership. And we can only go so far as an elementary school with rabbinical school. Like, I don't know what our effect will be on rabbinical schools, except to say that the pipeline is there from our school, that we already have students who are starting the Jewish club at Lane Tech, or who, at every high school in this, our kids go to almost every type of high school, Jewish, independent, public, and everywhere they go, they are developing leaders, I would say. And the values that they learned in school along with their families is very strong. I want to say also one other thing, that day school isn't the only way. In other words, just as Dan alluded to, that there are afternoon religious school programs, there are youth groups, camp, all of that contributes to someone's Jewish identity, and you really don't know what's going to bring them in, what person is going to be their mentor or hero or someone role model. And sometimes that's what it takes. But I think community is part of it, is that they can't get it without a community. And whether it's a community of synagogue community, JCC community, day school community, that sense of Jewish community is what is really the strongest piece. And then what we do inside of that community is the cake.
Judy, I just want to clarify one thing, that I'm not at all questioning the quality of day school. I agree with everything that you just said. What I'm saying is, to me the analogy is a world in which the cars that we had were BMWs, and people said we have to subsidize BMWs because everybody, we need to get places, and then I would say, well, let's have Chevys, and the people who want a BMW should pay for the BMW. Why should? So in other words, you said that synagogues require support beyond membership dues. Yes, but generally that support comes from the membership. In other words, it's synagogues, and this is again just for accidents of how the American Jewish community turned out. But for whatever reason, federations don't generally give money to synagogues, nor do foundations, and so the reality is that's how they're supported. And I'm sort of saying that people who want to send their kids to day school should pay for the day schools. And if there are people within that community that are wealthier, just as in a synagogue, they subsidize for the rest. That should happen in every place. That's what I'm sort of raising.
No disagreement. And, however, and to your point, is I think it's really interesting, like, what we classify as infrastructure, right? If that's the metaphor. So what actually is infrastructure, and that might be different in the eye of the beholder. I still want to pin you down on the problem of the market size issue, and I think that there's a real opportunity, right, in thinking that. So then think different. Another way to think differently about it is like, great, it's always been done this way, that federations or philanthropies haven't funded X, Y, or Z. What would happen if they did? Sure. What might be the opportunity in doing so, right, where we start to look at clergy, or we start to look at schools as assets for the community beyond their memberships. There might actually be, some, there might be opportunity in that to some kind of leverage. So, I wonder about that.
Well, let me give you an example, though, and Judy, I'd be thrilled to hear. I wrote a piece years ago with Anna Robbins, who runs a similar after-school program to the Jewish Enrichment Center here. We wrote a piece that we said that wouldn't it be great if day schools provided after-school Jewish education for kids who go to public school? Now, we knew in writing that no day school was going to do it, but the reason that they're not going to do it is largely because synagogues will be upset at them. Because synagogues believe that part of their business model is providing after-school education. But our take was that day schools could actually do it better than synagogues because they have trained staff, they have the physical plant, there are all kinds of things that they could do. They have a music room, so they could have music lessons, and so people wouldn't have to choose between music lessons and Hebrew school. There are all kinds of reasons that we could lay out. But the reason why it's not going to happen is because of internal things. And my take is like how dare you not provide the Jewish education to the kids that we need in our community because a bunch of rabbis are going to be upset with you. But that's the reality. So the question is, how could we, so if we're going to talk, I agree with you, if we're going to talk bigger picture and sort of say, how can we really, I forget what you said exactly, but how can we use these resources for the benefit of the larger community, let's really do that. And that means that other parts of the community might have to change their business. How we do that, and that I would love to have that conversation.
Well, I can say this, that relationship building is probably the most difficult piece in the Jewish community. We, the Jewish people, have set up, I would say, barriers by having our separate movements and by being territorial. And even though we have a lot of shared values. And what I want to say is that, again, CJDS, is, I don't know how many hundreds of years it's going to take for it to take, in the Jewish community, because we have done that. We have found how everybody can celebrate how everybody else experiences Judaism, and that we have a certain respect and a certain celebration, not just toleration, but celebration of each community. And all I want to say is that we have a rabbinic advisory council that has rabbis from the different denominations on it, and it's taken 20 years for there to be trust and conversation around a variety of topics. And this certainly could be one of them. And, I think that everybody tries to find their place. And it isn't for wanting to step on the rabbi's toes, but I think that the congregations, again, it's a pipeline. Just like our junior kindergarten is a pipeline for the rest of the school, religious school kindergarten is a pipeline to membership of a synagogue. So that's all.
I have lots of things to jump in with, but I forgot I cited that paper when I was still in rabbinical school. More rabbis should have their toes stepped on in this realm. I wanted to know if you had $1 million, which is a substantial amount. It's not a huge amount. What you would do to change the Jewish world or do something to secure a Jewish future in the way you're seeing it. And I think it fits in with the infrastructure as you're describing it. So if you were to be handed this substantial amount of money, what would you do either to alter the Jewish landscape or infrastructure, or to provide it greater support that it needs to stick, as you were saying, Judy? Josh, we can start with you.
Yeah, I'll put a couple of zeros on that, but right, but
No, but I chose $1 million because it's not.
it's not right. It's not a crazy amount of money.
Yeah.
A million's kind of hard to work with, I gotta say.
It's not a
I'm going to
BMW.
redirect.
$1 million
I'm
a
going to
year
take the
or $1 million
opportunity.
total?
I'm going to take the opportunity to redirect the question because I think the question behind your question is like, if there were like an intervention that I would choose, I have long felt, and I still haven't really been shaken from this belief. If there were one thing that I would focus on, if every American Jewish child actually spoke Hebrew, read Hebrew, and not just ancient Hebrew, but I'm talking about like contemporary Hebrew. I think that Hebrew is it's the key to unlocking membership in the rest of in historically and contemporarily Jewish life. We're having this conversation in English, obviously, but I don't care. I really wouldn't care nearly as much. About theological things or practicing this, that, or the other. I really think that if I could just focus on that, I think that to me that would be the biggest bang for the buck.
But you, Judy?
I agree with Josh about putting a few more zeros on there. But I want to say that the first thing that came to my mind was establishing something that would raise teacher salaries. Because, I mean, in any kind of education, be it after school, informal, it doesn't matter what, you need the teacher is at the core of that. And in order for teachers to be able to live and participate in the world, they have to, it's a job, and they need to make money. And so I would definitely raise teacher salaries with it and create something that would continue to fund that aspect. Because without the teachers, it doesn't matter, the walls. You can teach under a tree. You don't need a building.
So I mean, I got $1 million in the last year, more than $1 million. So that question feels like I could just tell you what I've been doing, which I can. But it's like when I saw that question, I was thinking, in the movie Austin Powers, Dr. Evil comes and he's been frozen for 30 years or something, and he just wants to hold the world hostage, and he says, and I demand $1 million, and they all like laugh at him because it's not what it used to be, and then he's like $100 billion. So it's like
That was precisely what I was thinking about when I wrote that question.
Yeah. Well, because I read it and I'm like $1 million, just like $1 million. Like, I mean, really, like it's weird. Like doing this work, you realize like $1 million isn't that much. Like it really, because if you're talking about professional salaries, that gets eaten up very fast. And that's why I said, are we talking about $1 million a year? I mean, that's one thing versus like $1 million total. So putting aside the question of the money, I'll say I really think it's two things. One is like. I think that Judaism, like, fundamentally has to be, I mean, this sounds big, but I actually don't think it's so big, like, has to be sort of reimagined to work better. By that I mean that Judaism should be something that people feel like they couldn't live without because it's helping me live my life every single day. Right? If people really felt that way about Judaism, I think a lot of these other problems would go away. I think people would pay for, like you're saying, Josh, people pay for colleges because they know that they matter. People pay to live in the right zip code because they know that it matters. I think part of why people don't want to pay so much for Judaism is because they aren't sure if it matters. And so I think, like, number one to me is to work on sort of and it's not just a marketing thing. I think there's a product failure. And I'll talk about that in a second, but I think that we sort of I think we have all the raw material. I mean, this is why I say that I'm a disaffected optimist. I think like Bill Clinton said, nothing is wrong with America that can't be fixed with what is right with America. I think that nothing that's wrong with Judaism can't be fixed with what's right with Judaism. But the fixing has to happen. And number one, and then number two is that I think we have to build an infrastructure of non-professional leadership that allows our professionals, I'm not saying no professional, I'm saying that allows us to have fewer professionals, better professionals that are affordable to us as a community. And the only way to do that, by the way, I have a dream that in 100 years there will be 1 billion Jews in the world. There should be 1 billion Jews in the world, because if Judaism is worth having for the 14 million of us, why wouldn't it be worth having for 1 billion people? So to my mind, if we actually have a Judaism that's powerful, people will be knocking down the doors to come in. And then the question is, what would a professional leadership look like that could sustain 1 billion Jews? Like I can't imagine that. But I can imagine a non-professional leadership, like the Mormons have, things like that can sustain, a growing population. So I say all this out of like extreme optimism. And so, so what I would invest the $1 million or the $1 billion in is a sort of process of sort of re-articulating what Judaism is all about and making that accessible to people. Like one example of that is like you could imagine a book like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It'll be like the 7 principles and practices of Judaism that can change your life. Like imagine there was a book like that and people could say like, I just live Judaism this way and it's a full life. It's not I'm not a good Jew. It's like, it's a really great life. Now, could I learn more? Of course. But this is a great life. Like, what would that book look like? I think that book could exist. I think all of us actually live that kind of simplified Jewish life in a certain way. We just haven't articulated it as something like powerful and meaningful and valid, and therefore we all kind of feel like we're not doing enough. And so what would that process look like? I just want to say that just want to share with you, and I don't mean this sort of in a political way. But I was in Israel a few weeks ago, and I had an experience where I was talking to Israelis, and universally they said, leftist, rightist, whatever, they said, like, I'm not finding an ability to have empathy for the Palestinian civilians in Gaza that are being killed, and I just don't really care. And they said this really comfortably, and I understand where that's coming from, but I don't think it's okay Jewishly, right? Meaning, because I think that what Judaism says is you have certain feelings, and then you tap into our tradition and our value system, like to love the stranger, and you say, this is hard for me, but I have to do it because it's what our tradition demands of us. And religious people too were saying this. And what I took away from that was Judaism's not working. Like, Judaism's not working to do what it's meant to do. Like, if Judaism was meant to just affirm our impulses, we wouldn't need Judaism. Judaism is there to check our impulses and to help us to live lives that are not the natural way that we would live them. And I didn't find evidence there, but I mean, that was just my most recent example. I almost don't find evidence of it, I rarely find evidence of it anywhere, where somebody says, I had a feeling of doing X, but then I thought about Judaism and I decided to do Y. And if that's not people's experience like every day, then I don't think we have the Judaism that we need. And I don't think we have the Judaism that's going to have the magnetic attraction that's going to have people banging down the doors to come in. But my optimism is that I feel like Judaism has that, and we could have that Judaism, but we have to do some hard work to articulate it.
We had the door, and I think you had God. But I wanted to hover on that book of the 7 things. If you want to respond to that, I got my 5-minute warning, but I want to know. I mean, one thing at the last event, Lizzie Heidemann talked a lot about joy. That framed her discussion, and I think joy is a way to frame our experience of being Jewish. And when you're talking about that there should be 1 billion Jews, I think if our experience writ large of community and of Judaism was of joy and informing our daily choices, there would be. But we can't get our shit together to agree on what would be the 7 things. We would be fighting about how many zeros, about what would be those 7 things.
That's why I think I could do it with $1 million, because you really only want to have like 2 or 3 people working on it,
exactly.
and then hopefully it'll work.
I don't know if you guys have a response, or what would be in that.
Well,
those
first
7
of all, I mean, the brand of Judaism that's coming the closest, I think, to doing what you're talking about, Dan, is Chabad, which has cheap,
agreed,
available, right, is replicable, is all over the place, is joy-centered, etc. So like, I'm in so many conversations where Chabad is not there, and I make this point, and it's like, what are we missing here? Why are we not having that conversation together? But so I think, yes, we can all be learning from that. I think, you know, if you're asking Dave, what are those key pieces? As I'm like sort of mentally, all right, Dan, I'll take the challenge. Give me the $250,000, I'll write the book. Me and 3 other people.
Wait, just a $250,000?
Yeah, 3 other people. You know, we'll write 4 books. I think, you know, I actually think we do this all the time. I think that there's so many lists. I mean, you know, the Gemara has its own list, and Pirkei Avot you could read as a list. And, you know, yeah, it's about Shabbat, and it's about community, and it's about celebration, and it's about, you know, being able to be with one another through moments of shared suffering, etc. I think that one of the challenges, and maybe, Dan, this is exactly what you're getting at, is that Judaism, as it has been constructed, is not designed to be a world religion. It's designed to have high barriers to entry. We see what the versions of Judaism that are designed to be world religions are. They're called Christianity and Islam, right? And so the question is, you know, is that our aspiration to have 1 billion people, or there's also something that has been, you know, very much ingrained in Judaism today that is sort of inextricably part of the narrative, and it is so hard, which is that, yeah, we're like small, and, you know, Vihisha Amda, like, you know, in every generation, you know, they come and we shoot down those, you know, missiles. And so I don't know. Like, Yitz Greenberg, who I wrote my doctoral dissertation about, Yitz would always talk about, if we could just convert 1% of China, right? I mean, like, you'd add like 10 million Jews right away. I mean, like, it would be unbelievable, right? I mean, just, you know, and so I wonder about, I wonder about what's the limit? I think you and I have had this conversation before. Like, what's the stretching point beyond which that distilled Judaism, you know, is it still recognizable as Judaism or not? Like, and I think that's a Gordian knot. It's a really tricky question. So maybe I don't want the money because I'm not sure.
By the way, just 2 things. If we have time later, I will let Judy go. But I have a story about the 1% of China that I think would be fun. But also, I just want to say, like, it's not that I have an aspiration to have 1 billion Jews. I think there would be 1 billion Jews if we had a compelling Judaism. I don't have an aspiration not to have 1 billion Jews. There's a quick story. So we had on Judaism Unbound in the first year or 2, we had a guest named Rabbi Juan Mejia, who is he grew up Catholic in Latin America, in Colombia, and he discovered that he had Jewish roots, as I think like 50% of Latin American Catholics do, and he wasn't able to like study at all in Colombia, so he went to Israel to study, and long story short, he eventually becomes a conservative rabbi. He goes to JTS and he formally converts to Judaism and becomes a JTS ordained conservative rabbi, and his mission is to like connect with other people like him who have Jewish ancestry in Latin America, and so he creates these YouTube videos in Spanish teaching Judaism that are aimed at people that have Jewish roots. And then he would do these like kind of mass conversions of those folks, and it was an amazing thing in and of itself. But what started to happen was he got emails from people who said, I don't have Jewish roots, but I found your Spanish videos, and I love this. I love Judaism. I want to convert. And he initially said, that's not why I was doing this. And he was kind of saying no. And then he thought about it for a while, and he said, why would I say no to somebody who wants to convert to Judaism out of sincere love? And so he started to embrace that and to convert them. And my thought when I had that interview was like, just wait till the Juan Mejia of China comes. Like, why won't he? One day there will. One day it will happen. So, and when that happens, the 1% or more will convert to Judaism, and then there'll be more Chinese Jews than any other kind. What will that world be? And I think we should take that as a serious question. And like, what will be the education system? What will be the professional? What will be the, you know, what we don't know. But I mean, like, but these are kind of forces that are not under our control, you know. And some people would look at that and say that wouldn't be good. I wouldn't like that, you know. And some people will say, like me, I was like, I'd love that. Like, what would, you know? But that's where I think, like, if we can think that way, then I think certain new questions present themselves.
Well, um, I think all I have to say about this is that um, having a bigger Jewish community, there is something to it when you go to, when we get together as a community and there's 1,000 people there, or there's 5,000 people there for a Yom Ha'atzmaut or whatever, a rally. So for sure, there is something about community where we need numbers. And on the other hand, after building a school from 5 students, I can say that there's something also beautiful about just building the community, no matter how big it is or small it is. And I want to say, like, this community in Hyde Park of Rodfei Zedek, like, you are a beautiful community. You've been here for many, many years. And, how have you built and sustained this community? It's by being together. And I think that when I think back to Chicago Jewish Day School, like, how did we build Chicago Jewish Day School? Literally, it was at the Shabbat table. Like, people would invite their friends for Shabbat, however that looked in their home. And they would talk about coming to a school. And so I think the people factor, the relationship factor, the joy, celebrating the joys, and being there for the times that are not, that are not as joyous. And I just think that I'm very hopeful that we have a huge, beautiful future of Jewish community out there, and that if all of us do our jobs of whatever we decided, the piece we wanted to take, whether it's the foundation, whether it's spirituality, whether it's the synagogue or the day school, that we're all contributing to the whole. And I think that we will have a very bright Jewish future.
Thank you. Something I thought about as we were up here that was a total oversight of mine, that all 3 of you represent non-denominations. And to your point, Judy, about this community, which is celebrating its 150th year, we have been a part of a movement. We have existed outside of the mainstream of Chicago, which has forced this community to be more creative and grow the class of non-professionals to not only do the work, but to have the vision for what that can be. And that is community. And it's community that provides the framework to matter, to exist, to have a voice, and to share your story. And that's one of such a joy of being up here. Knowing you in varying degrees, I learned so much from you, and it's an example to us to just ask the question. What it is to be in community is to make sure that you know that you matter, because the other person that you're talking to matters, and the person that you don't sit with matters. And so much joy of community is found in those conversations. And I just want to thank you for bringing the fullness of yourselves, for being yourselves up here and giving us your time, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. I know we had our first event not that long ago, so it was a quick turnaround. I really appreciate for you being here and making this happen. For your butts in the seats means something, and it means a lot to me. So I want to thank you, and I hope you enjoy the bagels.